afternoon and welcome. This is NC Debrief. Now, the Debrief brings Africa's top social stories into focus through compelling analysis and conversation, as well as different perspectives every week. With our guests, we dissect pressing issues and look out for angles and opinions that may not be in the mainstream. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun, and today we're looking at what are millennial parents doing differently. Joining me for this conversation today, I have Fatima Omokwe. She is a film producer as well as a mommy of one. Fatima, welcome.
Thank you.
And also we have Tolu Oladipo, who is a human resources expert and a daddy of two. Tolu, good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon, thank you.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, you can also join the conversation on NC Debrief by following us on Twitter at News Central TV or also on Instagram and watching on IGTV. But join the conversation and use the hashtag NC Debrief to be part of this conversation. Now, a millennial is a person who was born between the 1980s and the early 2000s. One of the main differences between millennials and the generations before them, you have Gen X, baby boomers, is that their time is marked by the fact that they transited into adulthood in the information age and are comfortable with their use of digital technologies and social media. Now, this makes a lot of difference in terms of culture, the level of awareness, willingness to try different unorthodox and alternative lifestyles. Alternative cultures are also being introduced from different places, and some people are adapting the way we used to do certain things. But one thing that may change or may not is how we raise and parent our children. And that's the conversation we want to have today. So Fatima and Tolu, let's start with what happens to be one of the most controversial issues when it comes to African parents, and that is the issue of discipline. For many of us, we grew up with parents who didn't have any question or any delay in extending anything, a shoe, remote, a bag, as in any household item in terms of disciplining us when they wanted to correct us. And we even had situations where family members extended and pretend neighbors as well could also discipline children. But we find that these days, many millennial parents are saying, no, that's not what I want. So in terms of discipline, what did our parents get right and what did they get wrong? Fatima, let me start with you.
Well, I think in terms of discipline is not does not necessarily translate to hitting a child. There are other forms of discipline. So I think that in that sense, our parents could have spoken with us. They could have taken away privileges, and then they could have sometimes the disappointment of a parent is harder to bear than a physical, yes, like hitting the child or something. That's not to say I don't smack, I do. But I think that there's a good way to balance, all of it.
Tolu, what do you think?
Yeah, I think discipline needs to be age appropriate. I agree with Fatima. There is a place for corporal punishment. It also needs to be age appropriate and it needs to be proportionate. I think our parents, for their generation, that was the default disciplinary mode, but even at that time, I think it varied from person to person, family to family. I think the big difference, like you alluded to, was the fact that the culture, and I'm sure this was across many African countries, the culture was such that this mantra that it takes a village to raise a child was, literal. So anybody saw you as a father figure, mother figure, and therefore their child, and therefore if they were the responsible adult around, the onus was on them to discipline you. And it happened, you'd be at an uncle's house, an uncle who's not really a relative, and all of you are naughty, and all of you get punished the same way, his children or not. That is no longer the case here because in this generation, because it's more individualistic in terms of it's my family, my responsibility. You don't cross those boundaries. Is that a good thing? That's up for debate.
But I also think on that point that it may not simply just be about us being more insular in terms of my family. With the number of stories these days of child molestation and sexual assault and rape, you find parents not wanting any excuse for their children or their wards to be exposed to those things. And so that question now comes back to you guys. Would you allow your sister, your brother, your in-law or a friend to discipline your child in your absence?
Well, it depends.
If it was corporal punishment, physical punishment.
It depends on the sister and the in-law and the person. So, like you said, I don't want my child to be exposed to certain things. So I'm very, very particular about who I expose my child to. So we may be friends, but you may never see my child because I'm an adult and I can choose what and what not to do. But my child is very, impressionable, right? So there are certain people in my circle that I would trust to leave my child with because I know how they discipline and because I know that their children in my space also will be safe. You know what I mean? And so I know that even if they're going to smack the child, they would do it in love. But I don't even subscribe to that. Do not smack him when I'm not there because I would scold your child, but I would not take the liberty to smack the child because I just feel that there are certain lines that you do not cross, right? So yeah, I'm very, very particular.
So the same with you. Would you allow someone in your absence to discipline your child?
Yes, and exactly to Fatima's point, it depends on who. For the most part, you only leave your children with people you trust, and not just trust, you trust their values and their value system to say, okay, they will be disciplined appropriately and proportionately to the offense and in a corrective manner. And, they would not be exposed to cruelty or anything like that.
Okay. Now, again, as we said, the issue of discipline happens to be one of the most controversial, especially when it comes to African parents. A number of people, myself included, can share stories with you. In hindsight, now I can laugh about it and think that my parents, again, did not know beyond the time that they were raised in themselves and the time they were raising me in. But we went to the streets and we asked people about this issue of discipline, and this is what they had to say.
The modern method of raising children. I mean, I would try to blend the old way where the parents are strict together with the modern method where you have to show love to the children. So I think showing too much love to the extent that you pamper the children is not good enough, and then being too strict at the same time is not good enough. So I would try and strike a balance between the two.
Parents of the generation tend to realize the mistakes of the previous generation. So they are kind of allowed for free hand, allow kids to do what they are passionate about. How I just feel.
The new parents now, they don't beat children the way they used to beat us then. They don't, no punishments, then you must do frog jump, 12 lashes, no food, but now there's nothing like that. They will only advise. There are some schools, some parents will advise, will tell those teachers will tell you, please don't touch them. Just bring them to us. Don't beat them. If we see any mark on him or her, we will report you.
The operative word that she used was beat. And we talked about, when you talked about, you said corporal punishment, you said smacking. And I'm thinking back to a time when I was in my early teens, I did something, all I can remember is orogun, turning stick. All I remember after seeing an orogun coming towards the side of my head was stars. And to this day, if I tell my mom does not remember, but I remember the incident.
Convenient.
I'm telling you, very, very convenient that she doesn't remember. I remember, and I remember what I did, and I remember that after that, I never did it again. But there are studies in the West that says that discipline or physical punishment can actually impede the development of a child, sometimes can turn them to being aggressive and violent. And then if you look at millions of Nigerians, millions of Africans who were actually physically disciplined, you might actually want to question that study. Do we, at this point in time, are we allowing too much, as some people would say, Western or new age thinking to get into how we raise our children? You saw the older woman at the end and she said parents of this generation. Like we're becoming too permissive and allowing them to just be and do too much. Tolu?
No, absolutely. And that is one of the effects of the information age. People imbibe cultures that are not necessarily aligned to their own cultural background and their own cultural thinking. And it happens in various ways. A random example, there are certain phrases that are applicable in the West and they have been carefully curated, often for a political purpose. So if I throw up the term pro-choice, for example, that is within a specific deliberate context around abortion, for example. But now we use it freely to mean what the proponents of that agenda have called it. And it narrows the debate to the nexus of the Western entities that are battling around that issue. Okay, so I think it's important sometimes as parents to filter some of these things and to understand the context. So the study you gave, for example, around corporal punishment, the reality is most people will never read those studies.
Yeah.
And studies, particularly statistical studies on social issues, are very narrowly defined. And if you narrow it down, I don't know, I haven't read those studies, you may find that they're addressing a particularly narrow issue. And so the generic conclusion that it affects
Negatively.
children negatively, maybe just within a narrow context, we don't know. So one needs to be very careful about that. But that's a side effect, an unintended consequence, if you like, of the information age.
So Fatima, do you share that? Because there are people who think that we are such a global village, and Tolu did earlier say about the fact that we used to believe, or maybe some people still do believe, that it takes a village to raise a child, but we're no longer acting as neighbors and villagers to an extent. We're acting more as global neighbors. And so now we're allowing global influences into our parenting styles. Too much, too little, right balance?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. The truth is, even in my own situation, my son, I get very impatient with him, and you know how it is. You now get mom guilt, and you're just like, oh,
why did
I shouldn't have done that. I should have just calmed down. But that's already always in retrospect.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, and I noticed that when I was smacking like, don't do that, don't do this. Initially it worked. But after a while, I'll smack him and he goes right back to me.
He was getting hardened.
Because he knew that, okay, this is what it's going to be. And then I had to change my methods because I now had to mix it. So yes, there's an influx of information, but you can, like he said, filter.
Yeah.
You take what you feel will work, and then you leave what you feel will not work. But I think, like I always say, I think balance is key. You need to know what works, and then you need to know your child as well.
Yes,
because there are different children, and the truth is there are some children that talking will not work for. You need to smack. There's some children that smacking will not work for.
You need to talk.
My son, I realized that when I talk to him, he now comes to me and he says, "Mommy, are you sad?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm really sad." And that has more of an impact on him. Than actually smacking him.
Okay.
But smacking does work sometimes. So it's just.
I see you don't want to leave it. You're not ready to leave it.
No, I'm not.
But before we move to another aspect of this conversation, there is a tweet we have available for you, and that is, of course, something that references this issue of beating or discipline in the African method of raising children. So it was, "I'll forever honor my parents. My father gave me honest love, even though I never met him. I was always told his love. Mama loved me through all the pain she went through. She beat me up and told me she loved me. I couldn't ask for different parents. I wish I can wake them up." And obviously somebody who lost their parents, but a tweet coming from somebody there in South Africa. But now another part of this conversation, there's so many areas. Fatima has mentioned emotions, and we'll get into the emotional context of raising children. But let's also talk about something that one of the individuals in our interview in the Vox Pop mentioned, and that's careers, letting children choose what they want to become. Now we know generations past, African parents pushed for engineer, lawyer, doctor. Teacher was still quite a respectable profession at that point in time. But now we see a point where parents are allowing kids to be a little bit more unorthodox in the professions they choose. You can be a caterer, you can be a musician, you can be a dancer, you can be a mechanic, you can be a hairdresser. So in terms of career choice, have we really opened up the spectrum in terms of parents saying, you know what, I will not tell you that this is what I respect and this is what I expect, but I will allow you to find your path, to find your way. Fatima?
Okay, well, I would say, I would again speak from my own situation. I spoke with my husband, and the agreement is, once you're done with secondary school, we already know where you're headed. We already see the direction that you're headed.
What's the direction?
No, by then we know what he likes, what he doesn't like, where what he can work with, his own skills or anything that comes naturally to him, and then you will specialize in it. Because I don't believe in, just go to the university and get a degree. Then when you finish getting the degree, then you can now do whatever you want, because you have to have a backup. I don't believe in that. I believe that, whatever because time is money.
You're wasting especially time. In this generation.
Those 4 years that he's going to go and study something that he's not going to need, it's a waste. So let him study professionally whatever skill it is that comes naturally to him, and then let him use that in his life. That's what I believe.
Now, Tolu, you have a teenager and a preteen, and it's almost very obvious now where their talents sort of lie. Do you have a wish for what you want them to become, and does it align to what it looks like they're going to become?
No. I am very much of the school that children are going to grow up and decide what they want to do. the best you can do is sort of advise based on whatever skills, tendencies you see. The reality is, because of the way the world is changing, and not just in terms of technology, in terms of what is commercially viable.
Yeah, the kind of jobs for the 21st
has radically
century.
changed, and it is continuing to change.
Yeah.
Simple example, during our generation, probably even earlier, parents, African parents particularly, would not encourage their boys to play football. And then suddenly they see these Nigerians making thousands of pounds a week.
money.
And then suddenly, hey, parents are buying the football and sending their kids to football academies.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going to continually change. But I think the biggest paradigm shift is social media. And the reason is this. For the very first time in history, it is possible to directly monetize popularity. And popularity has two sides. Notoriety is the flip side of the coin. So the more likes you have, the more money you can make instantly, and it's directly correlated. It was never like that before.
Yeah.
You could be popular or notorious, and hey, big deal. You play an
somebody in the
instrument,
next town
nobody
will
cares.
Yeah.
Yeah, people might have heard of you, but hey, it doesn't necessarily, you fight for that record deal and you never get it, and that's the end. Now it's no longer that way. Now that creates an opportunity, it also creates a challenge.
Yeah.
The opportunity is kids can literally make it in life doing anything or nothing, become a Kardashian and do nothing, and then build an empire on the back of doing nothing.
There are business lessons.
They build an empire.
Business lessons.
They built an empire on the back of doing nothing, really, on the back of looking pretty on TV.
It's a hard job.
I mean, I disagree, but
That's a different conversation.
Okay, but you get my point.
Yes, yeah.
So kids can literally make it doing virtually anything. There are guys, who have YouTube channels. I don't know if you watch some of these YouTube bloggers who literally do nothing. They just show stuff. They have 10 million users, and they're making money.
And they're monetizing.
Yes. So because of that, there is less pressure on parents to say you must be professional in this line, because whatever you do, so long as you do it well enough, the market will determine whether it is sellable.
Now I want to come in here, because on that point, I know there's a young boy on social media who, on YouTube particularly, I can't remember his name right now, what he does is he gets toys and he reviews toys. I think he's under 10 or 12 years old, and that's how he's making his money and his family is making money. Toy manufacturers send him the toys, he uses them, he reviews them, and he puts them up, and he has millions of followers. But it also brings into question this whole issue of social media. When is it too early to expose your kids? For many of us, we use social media to show the cute parts of our children, when they do their ballet lesson, when they first walked. But there are other people who want to use social media in a way and maybe use their kids as well to make money. I know there's a reality show of a woman out of the United Kingdom who says her baby is going to be the first £1 million baby, making, yes, there's a reality show, yeah. So she wants to use social media and this young girl, beautiful young girl, barely 2 years old, to make money, to make £1 million off of social media. So where's the line? Because I think some parents get caught up in, number one, trying to keep up with the Jonases, in terms of our friends are sending their kids abroad and the kid is doing holiday in Dubai. You see those pictures, or the kid has this new tablet or this new phone, and they feel pressure to do that as well. Then also just wanting to share the memories of your child on social media, and then also looking at it in terms of monetary value as well. Where does all of that come into being a good parent or not? Fatima.
Well, I mean, I don't want to judge.
And it's difficult.
But I think that, you just need to make sure that that child is fine and that child is not coping. You have to really watch to make sure that there are no negative effects, because you can raise a narcissist without even knowing. Yeah. So you have to, so that's just, for me, that's where it falls. Personally, I don't, put my son up as much as his dad does, but that's a privacy thing. He's not as private as I am, personally. So that's just, and then people have said, you guys need to start a YouTube channel for him. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that.
But no, you'll end up being all the pages where it's the child's page, but the child is saying, oh, mommy, thank you so much for the toy. And then the mommy's account is replying, oh, baby, I love you. Are you okay?
Explain
For
to
yourself.
So I'm like, no, we're not doing that. Like, I cannot keep up with that lifestyle, and I just want my child to be a child. Like,
Yes.
let's just leave it at that. But that's me.
Is it too much? Where's the line?
Well, there are a lot of red flags, and Fatima says she doesn't want to judge, but everything on social media is a judgment. A like is a judge, a comment is a judge,
A scroll pass
a scroll pass is a judgment.
Yeah.
So I think there are numerous significant dangers around social media, even apart from the obvious ones like security, like the child becoming narcissistic, like, you know. I think the biggest one for me, biggest concern for me is that the aggregate of social media, I think, is making this generation, and I'm speaking as an honorary millennial.
Yes, because we can see the gray.
I think the reality is it's dumbing down the generation. People, particularly young Africans, generally did not have a very strong
Did
propensity.
you hear her sigh?
It's sad.
I'm sorry, but did you hear?
It's just because he just hit on something that weighs heavily on me. You know, you have a conversation with some people,
Young people,
and you're just like, I feel bad for them because that's their normal.
Yes. You know, young people all along in every generation, particularly African young people, do not generally have a strong propensity to read. Now it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
There was somebody that I shared with, and this is a young professional, a manuscript I was reviewing, and it was a topic we had been debating, very interesting. And I sent this manuscript to this millennial, and after a few weeks I asked, and he said, oh, it was too long. Didn't bother reading it. So it is a problem. So when you now start wanting people to have conversations around philosophy, around history, around, you know, what the ancient thinkers talk about, it's not going to happen.
It gets lost.
You know, and there are fewer and fewer and fewer people who will dive deep in subjects they don't have to study in school.
Yeah.
And for me, I think that is the biggest
loss
we have with the information age. It's called the information age, but maybe
But
it's
really,
not.
where's the information?
We have to bring reading back.
Well, that's another
We have
conversation.
to.
There's one we have to really get to, especially when it comes to raising children. That's gender roles. Now, when many of us were young, girls were in the kitchen with the mothers, cleaning up, cooking, helping to do the house chores. Boys, sometimes, not all the times, I'm not generalizing, ended up, you know, either doing what the father was doing, nothing, or maybe sweeping or harder chores. And you found that with this generation, those gender roles are either being completely conflated, some places absolutely reversed, and some places absolutely being cut down. So in terms of you having a 3-year-old young man on your hands, what do you think of when you look at him in terms of gender roles? Are there toys you buy that you sometimes think, oh, because he's a boy, I'm buying this? Do you act towards him or say certain things to him or don't say them to him because he's a boy?
No, as a matter of fact, there's someone, one of the people that come around us, and he's always saying, when my son is crying, he's like, don't cry, be a man. And I'm like, he's a boy. Don't say that to him. And he's a baby. He can cry if he wants to cry. Because I realized that a lot of men are unable to access those emotions because they were told to be a man. And that even affects them. That now affects them in their marriages, in their relationships, because they're like,
as well.
you know. So I feel like I'm trying to raise my son to be independent. So he's going to cook. He's going to know how to cook for himself. He's going to know how to clean for himself.
Because it's a life skill.
It's a life skill, and you know, it's from the little things. He uses a wipe, he wipes something, and he just drops it on the floor. And I'm like, no, pick that up and take it to the dustbin. So if I say that, you know, more than, you know, what's the
over
word?
and over,
over and over, he will, you know, just learn that, okay, I have to pick up and clean up after myself. So I don't like toys, for instance. Listen, there's just so much information, and I try not to expose him to certain things because I just don't think it's the right time.
Yeah.
For instance, when by the time my son is 5 and he's going to school, he's going to have to learn about the different genders. He's going to have to learn about the LGBT. He's going to have to learn about all of it. No, you know why? Because I feel like he should know it from me.
That you're the one.
I can now tell him this is what it is and this is what it isn't. Because if he goes out and someone else tells him, I know this is actually, you know, what I have to control.
You have to be the security guard.
Yes, for now, so that by the time he gets to an age where he's making decisions, he can make, you know, better good.
So in terms of gender roles, you have a 14-year-old son, I believe, and a 12-year-old daughter, and you've watched them grow. You've watched them either be the typical boy, be the typical girl. But do you think you've managed in a way to raise them without trying to make them male and female and feel like this is what the female has to do and this is what the male has to do? Have you succeeded?
Well, I'm a bit...
I know I put you on the spot.
No. I sort of want to address the question itself. I do think there are certain things a man has to do and there are certain things a woman has to do. And I will come to that in a minute. We were all boys growing up. So as a man, I cook, I clean the house, I wash, I can scrub floors, shine and polish them. I know what surfaces require what kind of polish. The kitchen, my favorite activity, they tell me, is grilling.
Probably because it was going into your stomach.
Probably. So I don't think staying in the kitchen is a female gender role.
It's a life skill.
But I do think there are male and female roles within the cultural context of the African. So it is a role of the man when he becomes a husband to provide for his family. Absolutely. I believe that is a male gender role. And I'm bringing up my son to do that. I do believe that it is a female gender role to think straight and to take decisions and not take stuff, because it's handed to you. I believe that is a female gender role, and I'm bringing up my daughter to be a strong person who is not afraid to speak her mind to anybody. And I believe our daughters need to be taught that. So in the African context, we need to understand that there are still aspects of our culture that are our culture. For example, I have asked when these debates about male and female gender roles come up, I've asked numerous African women, would you be comfortable if your husband was staying at home, taking care of the kids, not doing a job, and you were the primary provider, going to work and getting the money?
Okay.
All of them said no.
I'm going to pause because I feel like in this one conversation on parenting, like 2 or 3 other social-cultural conversations have come up. Yeah. And it's difficult to separate them because for many people, their parents will always be their first example of relationship. They'll be the first example of love between a man and a woman, be first example of what you do with your finances.
And even gender roles.
And gender roles. So the issue of how we're raising our children will also always come up with how we are as men and women. So we're going to call a pause because I think there has to be an ability to expand these conversations so that they don't fall by the wayside. But we are wrapping things up, and this is always what happens on the debrief. But one question I will ask is, we've talked about, for many people, what our parents got wrong. And for many people, it's the issue of love, or not being able to show emotions, or not being able to apologize. Or if your parents felt they were wrong, the mother will say, have you eaten? Have you eaten? Is my love language. Or if you ask them a question they think is foolish, it's on my head. Or they'll call you, and let me say, I'll confess. One day, my 4-year-old, I called her from her room and said, Corday, help me get that remote. It was where Tolu was. She got the remote for me, and I said, yes. I am an African mother. But then I thought about it, I was like, I hated my mom doing that to me. Am I going to repeat those things? So looking at that in this context, what are we going to keep from our parents and what are we going to let go in how they raised us? Fatima.
There's a lot to keep because the truth is we do have our own culture, and the fact that information is flowing in from the West doesn't mean that we take everything and dump what we know to be normal, because it works. You know what I mean? It works. We have a culture. It is rich. It is beautiful. Yes, my parents may have smacked me a little too much, or may not have spoken to me in the way that I understood at the time when they were speaking to me, but they did raise me and I turned out fine.
Okay. And many of us did.
I'm fine. So I think that there's a lot to keep, and then there's a lot to adapt. Adapt. There's a lot to adjust. And,
Okay. Tolu, you have to make it very quick.
Yeah, I agree largely with Fatima. I think the main issue is we need to recognize that the world has changed and it is less safe than it was during their time. Yeah. And because of that, a lot of things have to be adapted. Absolutely. But having said that, yes, you don't just take everything from the Western who say it's cosmopolitan, it's worldwide, it's not. We do have our culture and we should protect the good aspects.
All right, we also will wrap things up with a final tweet that sort of addresses this issue of millennial parenting and, of course, African parents as well in raising their children. And it says, maybe you can just understand their way of loving. Done. I've become friends with them. It's actually very easy. Most of us just want us to be loved the way they want, but not everyone knows how. You can just make an effort the other one way. Actually costs nothing. And so many of our parents were reflections in raising us of the generation where they came from. And what we all need to remember is that we can only raise children for the generation they're in. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been another NC Debrief. Make sure you tune in same time next week where we take another look at an issue that is spread across the African continent. Thank you so much to Fatima and Tolu for joining me as well. My name is Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Follow us on hashtag NC Debrief or on @NewsCentralTV. Have a great day. Hi, my name is Tolu. You're watching News Central TV. Click here to subscribe to our YouTube channel.